Hey, everybody. We're back. It's Super Monkey Fighters. I'm Loki here with Papa Nugget and Monkey Feathers. We're going to do another movie podcast. What would you change? And getting into the holiday season, Halloween season. We went back to a classic, Friday the 13th, the original from 1980. We'll be discussing that today and giving you our thoughts. So, the synopsis is: a group of camp counselors are stalked and murdered by an unknown assailant while trying to reopen a summer camp, which was the site of a child's drowning in a grisly double murder years before. Directed by Sean Cunningham, written by Victor Miller, stars Betsy Palmer, Adrienne King, Jeannine Taylor, Robbi Morgan, Kevin Bacon, Harry Crosby, Laurie Bartram, Mark Nielsen, and Peter Brower. Betsy Palmer playing Mrs. Voorhees. There's an interesting story about her I read recently where she didn't want to do the part, but her car broke down and she needed money. And so that was the reason that she became Mrs. Voorhees in the movie. So yeah, what'd you guys think?
I forgot how cheesy it is now watching it basically 40 years later, because one of the things that I really kind of didn't like, and I guess it makes sense because older movies, you're hiring kind of who you can, but it seemed very over the top acting, especially in the death scenes where they're just like, oh, I'm so dead. Oh.
Actually, one of my favorite parts of old war movies, like black and white war movies, is anytime anyone's shot, they do that and then they fall forward.
Yeah.
Usually for the big dramatic effect, but it's, yeah.
Yeah. Well, with this, it's supposed to be a scary horror film. And then you get a cheesy death scene and over dramatic and people dying, just, I'm so dead. It felt very a game that you'd play as like children where you're just over the top dramatic acting, and that's kind of, it took me a little out of the movie, but it was still an enjoyable movie. I still like it. But sometimes with the death scenes, I'm just thinking, how are you going to die this time? And how's your overacting going to be? But one of the really big things that I didn't like about this movie was the logistics of the killer. Because with the deaths and how they're displayed throughout the scenes, it kind of didn't make sense. Especially, spoiler alert, it's, Mrs. Voorhees, she's the killer. But with hauling bodies up onto bunk beds or hauling bodies up into trees, or there's the scene towards the end where I can't remember which camper it is, but she breaks through the kitchen window and she's on the ground. Did Mrs. Voorhees just pick her up and throw her through the window, or was she tied to something and swung through the window? Because when, again, I can't remember these characters' names, but when the final survivor runs outside, Mrs. Voorhees is driving back in the guy's Jeep. What?
Well, it's her Jeep. So that was one of the confusing things, is she just
was it her Jeep or was it his Jeep? Because I thought that it was towing something. I thought it was towing something, which is what
it also had. It also had the body in it from the beginning, and that was just a play to think that she was picked up by the guy who owns the camp, the first.
Well, I know that, so. I know that, but I thought that it was towing something. I thought it was towing his trailer, and so I thought it was his Jeep.
Was there a trailer at the end?
Okay.
Oh, then maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of confused by that too. I wasn't sure which Jeep it was.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
I wasn't sure if they were just reusing the Jeep because they didn't have a big budget, or.
And yeah, I think that they tried to do that to throw in the misdirection that there's the two Jeeps, because that's the way I read it was. There were two Jeeps because he didn't have the cover on his when he drove away, and then it was there. But then he had it later when there was just a lot of stuff that just kind of probably more budgetary restraints and those kinds of things that really affected how all of that went down. So
Yeah, and I mean, overall, I understand the idea of misdirecting. Is it the guy who's opening the camp? Is it his Jeep? And is he the killer? I get that, but there's still some of the logistics of how do bodies get up in trees? How do bodies fly through windows? Why is there a body flying through a window and then all of a sudden someone driving back in a Jeep and it's the killer, but it was basically 2 minutes later?
Well, why is the
So,
person killed on the archery range not full of arrows, but the dude killed at the generator is?
yeah,
You know, it's because I mean, it was just it really is just the shock effect. I mean, they were just stringing together the death scenes. It really felt to me a lot more like it was a tech demo for special effects.
right.
Was really where they put the emphasis because of their restrictions on things. You know, they put more effort into those than anything else, other than Kevin Bacon's acting, because you know,
And
that's he's
going into this, I didn't even realize it was a Kevin Bacon film.
yeah. So in the snake scene, early on in the film, it's kind of a jump scare before I think somebody actually has been killed, but before anything's really going on. There's a snake in the one of the cabins, and they all kind of slapstick try and find it.
Let's all go into a small room to chase out this snake. Is that all? More people will make it easier.
Yeah, they end up chopping it into 3 pieces effectively. That was a real snake you actually saw get chopped up. My first thought on that was like, wow, that was very realistic. So I looked it up. Apparently, PETA didn't really monitor movie sets in the 80s. So, and that's where I think, people talk a lot about the special effects and the practical effects. I think this was a very good explanation of that with a restricted budget, because if you compare it to movies that even came out 10 years before, there were some amazing visual effects and some amazing makeup effects that these just don't quite live up to. But given the constraints of it, I think they were fantastic, especially for the time frame as well, and how they utilized those limitations. Because it does have let's cut away really quick so you don't see the actual thing happening, but you really do see just the foundations of how horror and slasher movies evolved. I mean, it all kind of started right here, it seems, which is kind of interesting to see.
Well, and even with them doing cutaways, something that I did really like about this film, and it's something you really don't see a lot in movies nowadays, is how it was shot, and scenes were longer.
Yeah.
You're not cutting up a scene every 4 seconds, 5 seconds. It's holding longer. Some of the camera shots were handheld, so you can actually feel the cameraman essentially being another person there at the camp because it's handheld. They're up in the action of whatever's going on.
I actually didn't like that aspect of it.
From that took shots from the perspective
the
of
opening
the
scene, the first person perspective made sense, but everything after that, where it was a handheld or it was kind of a jerky camera or not a perfectly smooth movement, to me, it really just amplified more the amateurish nature of the filmmakers rather than lending anything to the story. It didn't feel to me like it was an intentional stylistic choice and more of we don't know what we're doing as much, so let's just film the thing that's going on, and whatever happens.
Right.
Which the scene where the dead girl comes flying through the window, that scene held way too long for me, and actors are trying to fumble around because they don't know what they're doing. It doesn't seem like they've got very clear direction, and so it didn't even hit the point of comedic for me. When she's trying to barricade the door at the end and she's tying off the handle, that just felt boring to me, because it rather than cutting it up or showing anything different, it was just, hey, this is what we're going to do. Just kind of barricade the door, and then we'll just roll the camera, but we're not going to say anything because you'll get picked up on the microphones. But that's
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's what you didn't like, is just how it was shot, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't hold up as well as other classic movies, in my mind. To be fair, I haven't gone back and watched a lot of those classics, especially horror movies like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's been years since I've seen that, so I'm sure it would have the same level of amateurishness, but it just, the memory of it, I think watching this again is the memory is now ruined of it, because I had this idea built up in my head as to what it was, and it's seeing behind the curtain a lot more now. So
then what would you say you liked about it?
I did like the effects. I did like towards the end, it's kind of mixed with Mrs. Voorhees, and just like if they had that level of creepiness and chase throughout the final kind of chase, last one, if that was the entire film, I think it would have been a lot better. But it's really just this faceless, nameless, unseen, I think you see hands, as all you see of the killer up until the very end. I didn't care. There was no fear for me, because it was just like, well, whatever, the obvious thing's going to happen, because they keep hearing noises from the other room, and obviously that the killer's in the other room. They have no reason to be fearful yet until the very end. If that happened earlier and they were more running from a killer, I think it would have been a bit better. But that was a great, the kind of psycho-ish split personality thing. I really did like that.
Yeah, that's something that I found interesting, that in this one, it's now the mother who takes on the persona of the child, instead of like in Psycho, where it's the son taking the persona of the mother. Spoiler for Psycho, sorry. Yeah, that was an interesting thing, though, to see that they did change up and make that a slight twist of personas. What about you, Nugget? What did you like about the film? We'll start out with like.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I did think the special effects were pretty good, considering this is a $700,000 budget film. And there wasn't anything that was like, it seemed very realistic in most of the effects, which I thought was good. I would have to say that's probably the only thing I liked about this. The pacing, and it's probably just, coming out in the 80s, it seems like older movies were generally slower in pacing compared to more modern films. So I don't necessarily know if it's specific to this one, but the pacing was a lot slower. And so it tended to kind of drag a bit. And that was kind of the whole thing. It's like, it's really boring, and then like something happens, and then it's really boring, and then something happens. And I'm not really big into slasher films in general, so I don't really like any of them, because they just seem really like I just don't like the format. It's more about we're gonna try and scare you, or we're gonna try and shock you. And this one, there wasn't really almost no shock value in it, until I think the only thing that was probably shocking was the very last scene. That's probably the only thing you didn't see coming, where Jason pops out of the water.
Oh, yeah.
The boat. The very last possible thing.
Well, and even then they leave that up to, was it an imagination? Sure. Was it real? And they explore that as they go later on. But yeah, it was everything you could kind of see coming a mile away. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much of that is just hindsight, because was that new and revolutionary in 1980? And just we've all become accustomed to those kinds of things going forward. Audiences are more savvy, or is it?
And I think that's just a big part
really
of it.
That obvious. So.
Well, especially nowadays, where a lot of horror movies rely on the jump scare factor, that it's not a buildup of a scare. It's more just music crescendos, and then all of a sudden there's a jump scare of some sort that is supposed to create fear. And so I do think a lot of horror movies nowadays do kind of ruin older movies, because I do imagine in 1980 it's a lot scarier, because it's a newer idea. It's more, I guess, realistic. It's not fast beats and everything's just going so quick. It's more build up, because these people don't know that their fellow campers are dying. And so they're just going about their normal routine. And so it feels, I guess nowadays it feels more out of place because it's slower. but probably back in 1980, it's more realistic because you don't know that there's a killer going on. You don't know that people are dying. And so you're just going about however it is.
This felt more like a very efficient assassin going through and just like they've been paid to come through and kill all these kids for some reason. And they're just very good at it because they're all silent. They're all stealthy, up until the very end. Like it's the last girl running around, she finally discovers a body. And then, that's the first, of all of that. So the tension wasn't there because the characters aren't afraid. So as the audience, you can't identify with them and feel afraid because no one is afraid until the very end. And so it just falls apart. The memory I have of this is like an amalgamation of all the Friday the 13th movies. And I think I had built up a completely different movie in my mind as a memory. Because I remember it being more, they all thought Jason was after them. And then there was a twist at the end.
That's what I thought as well. But
really, it's just there's an unknown killer. And it's interesting looking at all of the marketing now. Like even the movie poster, I guess the movie poster doesn't actually have the hockey mask. But everything else, like you would look up this film and it's Jason is the marketing for it. And he's, him and his iconic form is not even there and is barely mentioned in the film at all. So I think it would have been better if they had kind of built that up, but I don't think they had that plan. I think everything that came after it was someone else trying to make a better movie and they just had the rights to this. Yeah. So it seems kind of like Friday the 13th 2 was more of a, hey, we want to do this again, but do it right. And have a better killer and have those kinds of things. But I think that would have been a much better twist is if there actually was a twist. This was more just this character you've never seen before is the killer kind of a thing. But the way I remember it was always that there was a twist. And so it's a little disappointing and kind of ruined, the mystery that I had or the memory that I had of these movies. So permanently kind of cemented it into that really bad B movie that you enjoyed as a kid and not as an adult. So
then, Nugget, what did you not like? Something solid that you can say that you didn't like.
It was really boring to me. Like I was like pushing myself to finish it. Like, and I think some of it comes down to what we've already talked about with pacing, and I think we're spoiled and kind of tainted living in the age that we are. So I think it is kind of probably a little injustice with trying to criticize the pacing because it was a different time and a different place. But I just had a hard time getting through it because it was boring. And you could see everything coming, and like I did, there just really wasn't anything that was really driving any interest in me finishing it. But I will say it does have one of the most iconic slasher theme music, or it's not theme music, but yeah, I remember that as a kid. Like my dad would do that all the time, and and so like that's iconic. I mean,
and it's almost first scene in the movie too. I mean, it
starts out with
that sound kind of predates Jason as a scary moment in film. So
then how would you change this movie? Or what would be one thing that you would change specifically?
I would have done that with the way I remember it, where there's that bigger twist and there's more of an initial setup of Jason and what's going on, and everybody thinks it's him and they're all running from him at the beginning rather than the last 20 minutes, 10 minutes of the film. It's not even 20 minutes. It's, nobody knows anything's going on until the end of it. And then just done some better connections just across the board. Like the police show up at the end. They have no idea anything's going on. How, why are they there? Kind of things. Just some of those basic little connection, exposition, people give it a lot of flack, but it does draw the story it holds the story together in some cases. So there's just a lot of those kinds of things I would change, but the biggest thing would just be actually have that twist. because it is one of the things that's fantastic about the original Saw is there's a big twist at the end, and it that's what's going to make it memorable. And I don't think I'm honestly surprised that this spawned sequels after having watched it.
Mm-hmm. So then I gather that Nugget's response to what he would change would be pacing.
All of it. I don't know.
All of it.
I don't have anything specific. Like
more Kevin Bacon,
yeah,
but
more Kevin Bacon.
would that have made it better?
It would have. Yeah.
More Kevin
agree
Bacon,
that.
but specifically, just warning: there is a shot of could have been a body double, but. And that's the Kevin Bacon death scene. I think is one of the things I actually really liked the most as far as the effects go. That's the death in this movie that stands out. That's the one I remember. None of the other ones I remembered at all, but that's one that I knew.
Well, and that's so while we were watching it, and that was kind of the thing. We were trying to debate whether he was going to live or whether he was going to die, and he dies right then. Which you think they'd let Kevin Bacon live a little longer?
So Monkey Feathers, what would you change?
Yeah, that's the thing. You both kind of knock this movie, and you really don't like it. I do actually like this movie. I like what it kind of helped start, as well as, of course, Halloween. But
so you like it from a philosophical standpoint, not an implementation standpoint.
Some things that I think could have been done better, of course, but it's still from 1980. But I think that the one thing that I would try and change would be to make it more logical in how the killer killed people. Because like I mentioned earlier, it seems kind of illogical for a killer to kill someone and then haul them up onto a door with arrows, or to haul them up into a tree or lug them up onto a bunk bed. So I think some of the logistics of the killer, I think I would have made it more realistic, because it doesn't make sense that this probably 140-pound woman is lugging up probably 200-pound men into these positions as a scare factor. So that's something that I would try and change right off the bat. Because if they had gone your route, Loki, and decided to play the twist factor of, is it Jason, is it not, who's the killer, who's it not, and still made things realistic, I think that could have played more into some of the kills. Because you would imagine that Jason, as you know him from the further sequels, yeah, he's going to be able to lug someone up into a tree and that's that, or whatever. So I think if they had played up the twist or killed people and left them where they are and then had people discover them that way, I think that would have been better.
All right, so I guess we're going to wrap that one up there. Let us know your thoughts on Friday the 13th and 80 slasher films. Let us know which ones your favorites are. We will catch you guys in the next one. Leave comments down below, like, subscribe, share with your friends, all those fun things. Because we love doing these things. We want to keep it going, but we need to make sure that it's going to work out and that you guys are enjoying it. So anyway, we'll see you in the next one.